Okay, so welcome everyone. My name is Roxana Anton, as you probably know. I am the volunteer manager of United Nations Association Coventry Branch, and I will be chairing the debate today. I am a master's student in diplomacy, law, and global change at Coventry University. So this event is organized by United Nations Coventry Branch. It was formed in 2016 and it aims to build support and understanding on the work values and values of the United Nations. The association is organizing events, conferences, and educational programs built on the three pillars of the United Nations, which are peace and security, justice and human rights, and sustainable development. It does this by working in close partnerships with different organizations. It works with Coventry University, University of Warwick, Coventry Lord Mayor Committee for Peace and Reconciliation, and different schools and environmental activists. The projects that we're currently working on are the United Nations 75, that you're probably aware, climate reporters, restorative justice, eco-forums, and for a full list, just visit the website and register if you want to be a volunteer. I'm still in the process of getting back to the people that have already applied. So the debate today is for nuclear disarmament, and the motion of the debate is this House believes that the UK government should sign the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The treaty was passed by, was signed by 80 countries and ratified by 35, and it has the main point of putting a global ban on nuclear weapons. To come into effect, it needs the signature and ratification of 50 countries. And as I said, so far, 35 have already ratified. The five nuclear states, the US, Russia, China, France, and the United Kingdom, have not signed yet the treaty, which makes it harder to come into effect. The main prohibitions of the treaty are the development, testing, production, stockpiling, stationing, transfer of nuclear weapons and other nuclear explosive devices, but it also prohibits the use or threat of use, as well as direct and indirect control on nuclear explosive devices and nuclear weapons. So the motion will be up throughout the debate, and the opposing sides are Mohammed, the Treasurer of the United Nations Association, and Mr. Philip Brown, the Secretary of the United Nations Associations. We're going to start with the proposing motion.
Thank you. That's a very good introduction. Thank you. I like this general issue. So as Roxana said, there's two motions. It's quite a general topic, nuclear disarmament. But obviously we're going to try and answer this question more narrowly. So obviously, I'm sure you guys are aware, the whole nuclear weapon issue was just catapulted in the 20th century with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I'm sure you guys are aware of all its consequences and the tragedy that ensues following the strike of these weapons. I don't think myself and Philip are going to argue about, the detrimental nature of nuclear weapons. In a sense, I think we're all in agreement as to their catastrophic consequences, but we are going to debate about whether we think particularly the UK should make a motion in signing the new treaty, just for the future and the whole landscape of nuclear disarmament. So one of my first points I would like to mention about this issue in favour of having the UK sign this treaty is, well, firstly, following the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, I just wanted to mention Article 6, which states that each of the parties to the treaty undertakes to pursue negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to the cessation of the nuclear arms treaty at an early date, and to the nuclear disarmament, and to on a treaty on general and complete disarmament under strict and effective international control. So there, first and foremost, although the UK is moving more so away from nuclear disarmament as it seems by not wanting to sign this treaty, they have in fact in 1970 declared that they will make this commitment to eventually have an ultimate goal of nuclear disarmament. And I think now, just where the whole landscape of the international order is leading to, with conflicts left, right, and centre, they themselves just maintain nuclear weapons just for the purposes of disarmament. But I think it's vital to remind them that this is a commitment that they have adopted when they first signed it. I think more so at that time it was more about gradually reducing the number of nuclear weapons and limiting the capabilities for nuclear weapons to be made, but I don't think these articles and provisions are being adequately adhered to. So I think that was a fundamental point to raise just off on the outset. It would also, the UK would join the humanitarian initiative that was founded in 2015 by non-nuclear states. So they themselves, you'd see regions across the world in Africa and South America really taking a strong initiative to complete disarmament. So I think that would be a strong action for the UK to first take that step. So you have countries like Pakistan, Israel and India. These countries are not signed to the initial nuclear proliferation treaty in 1970, so they are much further away from being a stronghold of nuclear disarmament in the future. That would be an even further way to go. But obviously countries like the United Kingdom and America, for example, they have signed, so that they've taken already progressive steps to ensuring nuclear disarmament. I think on a world stage, most countries are completely against the use of nuclear weapons. It's just for the deterrent factor, and I know my colleague Philip Brown is going to come on to a point of deterrence as to why the UK should hold on to their nuclear weapons. But I thought it would be an adequate time to sort of counter that at this stage. One of the problems with deterrence is it's not really as strong as an argument as you would think. The submarines, for example, as technology increases and improves, they are becoming less and less undetectable. So if they were to venture off one day, of course, as a result of human error or any issues with sort of programming or any such lines, that could be a reason for why countries who are also nuclear armed would, take that as a threat, either direct or indirect. Also, you have issues such as the info wars, where information is leaked, or there's hacking of documents, where countries can also see that to be a threat. So that the idea of deterrence is not really as strong, because that it's sort of promoted as the complete and utter last point of call whereby countries would act. But I think it's not as black and white as it may be presented. Obviously, with the signing of this new treaty as well, there's also the ability for the United Kingdom to withdraw as well if they so choose. This would, would be in the cases of extraordinary events which jeopardize the interests of the country. It would then take a year, and obviously the UK would still have allies such as America and France that would support them in the case of ultimate catastrophe. We have not really come close to nuclear warfare from a standpoint of the United Kingdom. There have been multiple events where they have come close. You have obviously the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. You have had issues, where they are seemingly coming close. So it wouldn't, and there's also that issue of a mutually assured destruction as well. So there are some reasons as to why the UK wouldn't sort of use their nuclear weapons, but they aren't always as great to have just completely nullifying the argument by having no weapons day in the first place. I think that would be something to consider in this debate. Politically, political consequences. It's often hard for countries to negotiate and become allies truly in terms of multidisciplinary dialogues when they are so divided on such an issue as nuclear weapons. This is something that is extremely damaging, and something that is also a big factor in why the UK, just to ensure that they are able to build stronger, more effective and legitimate and sincere ties with the international community, to be on the same page as each other on this issue. Economically, it's a massive detriment to the international order. Currently, the UK system of Trident, I'm sure you guys are aware of Trident, it will eventually cost £205 billion to replace the current system. 5% of this, £10 billion, would end homelessness completely, as stated in a recent study. I think focusing more on the social and economical and societal impacts, that having that extra pot of money would be massive for the UK, and especially the civilians of the UK. Just in each area, like for example with the current pandemic of the coronavirus, for example, just having extra money to fund resources, to fund research, I think it would go a long way instead of to ensure society is able to develop and build itself, instead of continually taking a step backwards. Like recently in January, for example, the threat of nuclear warfare was rife with America and Iran, just over the killing of one general, and it's always a constant threat and fear amongst human beings and civilians. It's not really the top tier of people in power and political control that need to be worried, because I'm sure they'll be off in bunkers hiding out, but it is the civilians that it will have a tangible impact upon. And yeah, so I think, and then obviously with the social impacts are massive. There will be more resources and more funds available for education, to improve social cohesion, to improve policing, which on each level would be a much better alternative. And then I think in terms of another main argument against having nuclear power, so it wouldn't be immediate. So there are steps that have to be taken with more dialogue. So the UK should definitely engage in these dialogues. Aside from what's been going on at the moment at the General Assembly, they're completely refusing to even sit down at a table and discuss this new treaty, because they are completely just against this, and it sort of brings about conspiratorial ideas of why, well, where's this money going? Why did they refuse to engage with this? So it is definitely another point worth considering. And then there's also an opportunity to review this treaty as well. So I think with the UK signing, it will always be in a constant motion. I think right now we're at a stage where it's at a complete standstill. In 1970 and in the 80s, there was a lot of movement, but it seems that there's a complete standstill at the moment, with the UK government completely abstaining from all conversations. And then, of course, you have the customary international law approach. So with the UK signing the new treaty, with more action and more involvement, it can eventually lead to a customary international law. And I'm not sure whether you guys are aware, but customary international laws are a source of international law, whereby there's two criteria which are needed. So you have state practice, and then you have opinio juris. So the first one, state practice, is basically with more widespread engagement and involvement of an adherence to a set of laws or a set of rules or a set of norms, and with the creation of these norms, we can sort of build upon these to engage such as genocide and such as aggression and war crimes. These are the foundations that we need to build now. And as stated earlier, the UK is a country and a state that could actually make these changes, and it would absolutely go a long way just within the next few decades if they can do so. And then opinio juris is essentially just where states are taking the action out of their moral obligations as should be shared internationally. So I think these criteria would be satisfied, and it would actually bump up the capabilities for nuclear weapons and nuclear disarmament to become customary international law. So obviously with that, what would come? What would be the effect and impact of nuclear disarmament and nuclear weapons becoming customary international law? So that would essentially just mean that the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, could then hear cases on nuclear disarmament, could hear cases on issues raised by countries about issues in Iran, whether they believe to be creating nuclear weapons or creating uranium or stockpiling certain weapons. So we can actually legalize this conversation instead of just having a political conversation about this. So that would be an absolutely impactful statement made by the United Kingdom if they were to sign this new treaty in pursuing this conversation. And I think it would be a genuine and effective and a poignant, absolute poignant statement made by the United Kingdom in this global conversation. And these are some of the main reasons as to why I believe that the United Kingdom should adopt this treaty, although not immediately, and I don't see there being such an adoption whereby there would be a complete cessation of the creation of nuclear weapons. But I think gradually just legitimizing this conversation, I think it would absolutely go a long way. So I welcome the audience to consider the points made, and obviously I would like to hear some of your points and opinions later on. But I think that for myself, just seeing the ability of the United Kingdom to engage with this conversation more effectively, I think it's one of the reasons and one of the foundational elements of this debate in terms of nuclear disarmament. And I hope to see that this can actually be achieved in our lifetimes. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Margot?
Yeah.
Okay. So, welcome to this debate. It's the first of the debates we're having. In fact, it was Mohammed's idea to have debates, and I'm very glad that we managed to capture an audience. So, first of all, I think I'd like to just pick up on one point before I forget. Mohammed's last point was that he thinks the UK government should sign the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, but he thinks that they should not sign yet. Now, in that case, I wonder when he does. I mean, I have to ask him this later on, but I wonder when he does think they should sign it. Maybe they should sign it when all the nations who have nuclear weapons will have signed the non-proliferation. I can't say this word. Proliferation. I got mixed up before, didn't I? The non-proliferation treaty. So there are two key treaties in this business. There's the NPT, the older one, the non-proliferation treaty, which the UK government and over 190 states have adhered to this treaty. It entered into force in 1970, and the parties met in 1995 and agreed to extend the treaty indefinitely. So there's that treaty. And then there's this treaty that we're discussing today, which is the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW, which came into force in 2017. It's not yet coming to effect, because in order for that to happen, 50 countries have to ratify the treaty. So, the UK government issued a statement soon after this treaty was passed in 2017, and what I will do as the main part of my discourse is to read through this statement. So it explains why the UK government refused to sign the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. And essentially, the UK government is committed to the long-term goal of a world without nuclear weapons. The UK government, and I'm sure all other governments who have nuclear weapons, take no pleasure in spending billions of dollars or pounds or whatever to maintain. I mean, Mohammed said it was going to cost 200 billion for us to renew Trident. And he quite rightly said that that is a huge amount of money which could far better be spent on many other things. So the UK government is very keen to get rid or to see a world without nuclear weapons, and for the older treaty, the NPT, to be the cornerstone of international non-proliferation regime and the essential foundation for the pursuit of nuclear disarmament, except for peaceful uses of nuclear energy. And as far as I know, there are no states who think that countries should not be using nuclear energy for peaceful uses. And in fact, it seems quite possible, this is on a separate issue, it seems quite possible that nuclear energy is going to be absolutely crucial in the future energy supply to replace fossil fuels, because it's one of the few sources of energy which are not dependent upon the sun shining or the wind blowing or other things. So nuclear power, nuclear electricity generation is probably likely to grow over the coming years. So the UK government wants to see a world without nuclear weapons, but they will not sign this new treaty. And the statement said, as we have previously made very clear, we do not believe this treaty will bring us closer to a world without nuclear weapons. The treaty fails to address the key issues that must first be overcome to achieve lasting global nuclear disarmament. And they list 4 of these key issues. They say it will not improve international security environment or increase trust and transparency. So I like to think of this issue, I mean, the world is a very tiny planet. We usually think of the world as being a huge place, but in fact it's a tiny planet in the overall scheme of things. And the way I think of it is, if you can imagine a small island somewhere in the middle of an ocean, in our case it's an ocean of empty space, with 200 houses. And each house is completely autonomous. The way we organise the world today is that we have about 200 nations, each of which has complete sovereignty. The governments have sovereignty over their populations. They can do what they want. So if you're in Iran, you can be told when you can speak, what you cannot talk about. Similarly in China, if you discover a new virus, you must not go out and talk about it, because it will spread panic, and the Chinese country cannot have its population just spreading these wild rumours. The consequence of that was the approach to coronavirus was delayed by at least a week, probably several. And the guy who first reported it, I believe, was actually locked up and made to sign a disclaimer saying that he told lies. So, but we have a world in which we say governments can do this to their populations if they want. What we don't really like is when they go around killing people, although the Iranian government has been doing that fairly recently as well. When they were having protests against the government, they shot several hundred people. But that is actually against the rules of international behaviour. But the United Nations, which is a world forum where these 200 states can talk, they don't intervene. They've only intervened once or twice, in fact only once, where all the nations or the Security Council agreed that they should intervene, and that was in Libya, and that's turned out to be a complete disaster. So this responsibility to protect has not been implemented since then. So the United Nations isn't going to, and the countries of the world are not going to intervene. Again, when they intervene in other countries, it's generally led to the situation getting worse. Coming back to my model of what the world is like then, these 200 countries, out of those, about 10 of them, well, they've all got guns, okay, to protect themselves. So they keep their guns and their rifles in their lounges or in their gun rooms, ready to stop other people from other houses coming in and attacking them. But a few of these, about 10 of these houses, these big houses, have got far more powerful arms, sort of cannons, that they can completely destroy one of their neighbours' houses. And it's those 10 big houses with these large cannons that we're talking about here. And what we're saying is that one of them should give up its cannon. And what the UK government, which is this country with the cannon in question, is saying is that there is an unpredictable international security environment. And I think we can all agree, when we've got international terrorism, when we've got states sponsoring terrorism, there is certainly a great deal of uncertainty in the international security situation. And they go on to say, we face today many demands, and the maintenance of our nuclear deterrent will help us. What they say is the unpredictable international security environment we face today demands the maintenance of our nuclear deterrent for the foreseeable future. And we cannot rule out further shifts in the international security context which would put us or our NATO allies under grave threat. And I think they're probably thinking about Russia at the moment. Russia is a threat. They've already invaded Crimea, which is part of Ukraine, which is completely against international law for one country to invade another, but they've done it, and they've got away with it. Part of the reason is that they've got one of these big guns that they can shoot other countries with. So when you have countries like Russia who are acting with impunity, going against international law, although we, or the United States and other countries, took out sanctions against Russia, but it hasn't stopped them, it hasn't made them reverse their decision. So there are countries which are prepared to invade other countries. The threat is, potentially, or the possibility is, that if a crisis occurred, that they might be prepared to use nuclear weapons. So, if we gave up our nuclear weapons, and for some reason there was a crisis between us and Russia, could we guarantee that they wouldn't then threaten us with their nuclear weapons? Obviously, things would have had to go to an extreme situation. So what Mohammed has just argued is that the wonderful United States would come to our aid, or maybe the wonderful France, or some other country with nuclear weapons would come to our aid. I think that was what you were arguing. Well, with somebody like the wonderful Mr. Donald Trump in charge of the fabulous United States, who earlier said that he would leave NATO, could we really trust that he would use nuclear weapons to come to our aid? Possibly. And hopefully he won't be there for very much longer anyway. But it's a risk. And the prime responsibility of government is to protect its population. That is the first and paramount job of a government, is to protect the population of the country. So, what the UK government is saying is that we need a better international security environment. We need to increase trust and transparency. In other words, if Russia is our biggest threat, we need to trust Russia. We need to trust that we can talk to them, that we can negotiate, that we both gradually reduce our nuclear weapons. That is what this NPT, the older treaty, says, that there should be the disarmament. This is the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, not the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Article 6. Each of the parties of the treaty undertakes to pursue negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to cessation of the nuclear arms race at an early date and to nuclear disarmament, and on a treaty on general and complete disarmament under strict and international control. So it's not just about nuclear weapons. To me, complete disarmament means you disarm, you get rid of all your weapons. Can we imagine a world in which nations do not keep, so these 200 towns have thrown all their guns and their cannons into the ocean, and they promise never to develop such weapons again because they don't need them, because they trust their neighbours, they're friends with their neighbours, they believe that their neighbours won't invade their houses, and they promise not to invade. That's the kind of world we want, and that's the kind of world that the Non-Proliferation Treaty is designed to achieve. This is the treaty that the UK government and all the other nuclear powers agreed to. By a step-by-step process of building up trust between nations, we all agree to reduce our nuclear weapons to zero. Gradually, in a planned way, in a way that's transparent, in a way that can be proven that you're doing it. That's the aim. Rather than one country saying, I'll throw mine away and I just hope that nothing bad happens. I would argue that the responsibility of government in the current global situation is to take the course of saying we want to, unfortunately we have to continue to own these things, but we want to negotiate with everybody concerned to gradually reduce nuclear weapons. As you know, the wonderful Mr. Trump is escalating the number of his weapons, and so is the wonderful Mr. Putin. However, we are not escalating the number, we're just replacing our redundant nuclear weapons. Going back to the UK government statement, the second part of it is that the treaty this new treaty, which it refuses to sign, risks undermining and weakening the older treaty. The older treaty has played an unparalleled role in curtailing the nuclear arms race. The older treaty continues to make significant contribution to the strategic stability that the international community requires. We must uphold and strengthen this older treaty because of, and not despite, the complex security challenges that we all face. It remains the right framework for progress across all three mutually reinforcing pillars, including disarmament. The third part of their statement is that there should be a gradual multilateral disarmament negotiated through a step-by-step approach, and I've covered that. And then in their the fourth part of their statement is that the UK will continue to work with partners across the international community to press for key steps towards multilateral disarmament, including the entry into force of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty and successful negotiations on a fissile material cut-off treaty in the Conference on Disarmament. And we will continue to play a leading role on disarmament verification. So, as well as those two treaties, there are a number of others which link into this ambition of becoming a world without nuclear weapons, and in fact without any weapons at all. So it's my argument, therefore, that this new treaty, they're not opposed to it as such. If that was the first treaty, okay. One other thing I should mention about this new treaty: any nuclear-armed state which signs the treaty, which joins the treaty, has a time-bound framework for negotiations leading to the verified and irreversible elimination of its nuclear weapons. Once you've signed, you've only got a limited time to get rid of your nuclear weapons. And the time is it's the time-bound plan for the verified and irreversible elimination of nuclear weapons, which it will submit to the next meeting of signed states or to the next review conference, whichever comes first. So it's a matter of a few years. So essentially, once you've signed, you're getting rid of your nuclear weapons. Not a gradual thing. A few years later, you've got nothing. And so that's how I see things. I think it's unfortunate. I don't like the idea. I'd much rather spend the money. Well, Mohammed wants to spend it on social care. I would rather spend it building nuclear power stations. If the world is going to, just on an aside here, if the world is going to replace all its fossil fuel power stations by 2050, we need to build one nuclear power station every day between now and then. For the next 30 years, we need the equivalent of either one nuclear power station or one huge wind farm or one huge solar panel farm, but big farms. Something that will produce the equivalent of 1 million tons of carbon dioxide, because a nuclear power station produces 1 million tons of carbon dioxide every year, and we need to replace that. And the cost of that would be $100 trillion. So we have 30 years to spend $100 trillion. That would cost us 4%, the world, 4% of its GDP. So this 200 billion would pay for, a year's worth, almost a year's worth of nuclear power stations. We've got 30 years worth to keep doing that. So there's far more important things to spend the money on. I totally agree. But we need to survive. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for any of the sides?
Sorry, can I counter some points that Philip made?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I think Philip's counter-argument was government's opinion. So first and foremost, that might not be representative of, the population of the UK. Might just, I think it's just a political statement that's been made. So Philip mentioned when we should sign the treaty. Now, we're not going to walk away today having the treaty signed. It's not going to be tomorrow, and it might not be next month. But I think having a genuine conversation at least would go much further. Last month, in January, we had Dr. Kate Hudson come in from the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. So she came in and gave us a talk in this very room, actually. And obviously, the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament is an organisation, one of the leading organisations in the UK that are fighting this corner of nuclear disarmament. So continuing to lobby against the government is what needs to be done. Not improving international confidence and security. I don't think that's really a strong enough argument. I think with security is increased by the complete abolition of nuclear threat. I think that might not be immediate, but it definitely is the best way forward, if that makes sense. I think Philip also mentioned countries invading others, which is illegal in international law. Russia, for example, with the Crimea. I think you'd find that we've done ourselves no favour over the last few decades. Afghanistan, Iraq. I think the United Kingdom as a government does not help itself in the battle against invading other countries and stabilising the landscape of the international community. I think, in fact, they're more brave and more brazen in acting and continuing to go to countries and take the lead in global conversations because they have the backing of nuclear weapons, and it's just that imbalance which supports them further. Negotiations have not been effective at this point. No real work has been done. I can admit that the numbers of nuclear weapons have gone down over the years, but there's currently a stagnation. Not really much is going down. I think Philip mentioned that as well. The United Kingdom are not building more weapons, but indeed America and countries like Iran definitely. We're suspecting these countries of going in the wrong direction. And I think there's a big difference between smaller internal conflicts between countries and complete nuclear extinction, which nuclear weapons would cause. I think the ripple effect of America, for example, suspecting Iran and then in turn hitting them with a nuclear weapon, which would obviously be something quite significant, that wouldn't then protect them from completely protect them from external threats. That would possibly lead to an ally of Iran then using a nuclear weapon, which would result in the United Kingdom then using a nuclear weapon against one of their allies, and so on and so forth. I think if nuclear weapons were present 100 years ago today, there wouldn't be a World War II, because World War I would have completely and utterly destroyed the landscape of the world. So I think nuclear disarmament is definitely something to keep fighting for as quickly as possible. And I think if anybody's interested in sort of supporting the work of the CND, we're looking to see if we can create a local group here in Coventry, because they're scattered around the country, but there's no actual local group of the CND in Coventry. So if anybody's interested about that, just speak to me afterwards. Thank you. Any counters about that or questions?
Yeah.
Philip, you were saying something about signing this treaty will not improve international security, And so there are certain countries that are aggressive, like Russia. So in case Russia decides to invade or attack United Kingdom, UK will have no insurance cover. So effectively, the nuclear weapons are a form of insurance. What makes us believe or think that Russia will come and attack UK? Obviously, there are a lot of other developed countries that do not have nuclear weapons, and they are not kind of schizophrenic or kind of entertaining this fear that UK, for example, Switzerland, the Scandinavian countries, they do not have nuclear weapons and they are completely living free. So what makes you think that once UK gives up the nuclear weapon, a country like Russia will one day wake up to decide and come and invade UK? Is it because UK has done something that is hunting UK, or what is UK afraid of? Because obviously not all countries possess nuclear weapons and they do not have these fears. So what makes UK think that once it gives up its nuclear weapon, other aggressive countries will target UK?
You don't think that Ukraine's frightened of being invaded by Russia? And you don't think that if Ukraine still had its nuclear weapons, because Ukraine gave them up, they had them, they gave them up. You don't think if they still had them that things might be slightly different? I mean, you're asking, is the UK going to be invaded by Russia tomorrow? No. But in the future, we don't know. I mean, 50 years from now, who knows what the situation will be. And the UK government says, we have this last resort. We don't want it. We'd like all countries to get rid of it. But while we have it, we think that it helps us to negotiate with other countries to say, let's all get rid of it. That's what the UK government does. They don't try and increase their nuclear weapons or threaten anybody. The UK government is, I'm obviously prejudiced. I think the UK government is probably one of the more sensible governments within the Security Council, and they obviously support the non-proliferation treaty. So we just don't know, and that's what they're saying. You just don't know what's going to happen. So let's not give up without making sure everybody else gives up as well.
I think by giving up the nuclear weapons, the UK would become more vulnerable to a potential attack from other states.
From wherever. I mean,
yeah.
Emmanuel Macron was talking about it being invaded by the US. That's after he fell out with Trump. But you just don't know, do you? What's going to happen in the future?
I think it's implausible to go off hypotheticals in these scenarios. I don't think the UK would overnight become more vulnerable because they didn't have a nuclear weapons program. They weren't vulnerable prior to creating their nuclear weapons. I don't think they would be even more vulnerable by the creation by completely disarming themselves.
You don't think we were in 1939? You don't think we were vulnerable?
Not from extinction, no. I think
there was a certain country that was invading other countries called Germany. If we'd had nuclear weapons at that time, do you think they would have tried to invade us?
If Germany themselves had nuclear weapons, I think that becomes a different issue entirely.
But then again, we're talking about an issue on some countries that already have nuclear weapons. So when I say that it's more vulnerable towards the country that already have nuclear weapons.
Why?
So it's like you fighting me. I have a sword and you have a stick. So obviously my chances of winning this fight are bigger than yours.
Depends whether your sword is bigger than his stick.
Maybe my stick's made of metal.
But I think using historical analysis to be a yardstick of what will happen in the 21st century is on the wrong premise, because the international system is different now from some time ago. So now I find it problematic to therefore accept some countries' claim for some countries not to develop their nuclear weapons, like Iran and North Korea. So if UK thinks that nuclear weapons, the ultimate insurance that every country can fall on in the event of attack, on what moral ground would UK therefore stand to tell Iran or North Korea not to develop a nuclear weapon, since it's an equally insurance policy that no country can dictate for them? So I think there is a double standard. If you think it is wrong, then you don't have to possess it. But if you think that it is wrong, but at the same time provide insurance, then you lose that moral right and moral credibility to tell any other country who is independent and also have interest to protect, to tell the person not to develop a nuclear weapon, because we think that that person is crazy, unlike you, and so he will use it in a wrong way than you. How do you reconcile these moral conflicts?
Because at the same time, they're trying to get rid of the nuclear. If the UK government was saying, we've got them, you can't have them, blah, 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 and just saying we're going to keep ours, okay, that would be totally wrong. But what they're saying is, we've got them, but we don't want them, we want to get rid of them. But if more countries get them, that just makes the problem even more complicated. We've got to get rid of them by negotiation between the countries that have them. And that's the reason they don't want any more countries, because that just makes the whole thing even more complicated. It's difficult enough now. I mean, to get countries to negotiate when you've got crazy men in charge is difficult.
Yeah, but the characterization of certain men as crazy and certain men as rational is premised on wrong foot, because every country has got an interest. You understand the United Kingdom currently is possessing the Chagos Archipelago illegally. International law has ruled against UK's claim over the Chagos Archipelago. International maritime law has ruled against demarcating that area as a marine protected area. So no country is rational. Every country is crazy at some point when they feel their interest is being kind of threatened. So it's not as if this United Kingdom is being a rational entity that has got everything right. Chagos Archipelago, they are claiming that land or possessing that land illegally, and they are giving it for United US to use that as a military base. Diego Garcia housing nuclear weapons and everything on that ground. So I think that on the premise that one country is rational and the other country is irrational is premised on wrong foot. I don't think President Putin will agree with any of this characterization as he not being irrational.
Well, okay, maybe irrational is the wrong thing, but dishonest, lying. We have a President Trump who tells how many lies every day. We have the Iranian government who denies that they shoot down airplanes. I mean, they just tell lies. I think that I'm not saying the UK government is perfect. It wouldn't claim to be perfect.
Yeah, but I think that as a leader of the international world, you need to set direction for other countries to follow, because UK was part of the country. In fact, UK started nuclear development before even the Manhattan program that gave birth to the first nuclear weapon in the world. So it is only right and morally justified for UK to also set the path towards complete nuclear disarmament by giving up its trident or whatever nuclear arms in her possession. So if you claim to whom much is given, much is expected. So given the respect that we can enjoy in the international system, it is only right and appropriate that you set the pace. That I know that we live in a dangerous world, whatever, but we still have to get there, and I'm setting the path so that any other country can follow. But if UK insists that the world is not stable, there is lack of trust, which is on equal side, then we are definitely going to get to nuclear disarmament. And if we are never going to get to nuclear disarmament, then we don't have any right to tell North Korea or Iran not to develop that ultimate insurance. How do you...
Well, I think I've answered that very last point. Talking about the paths, there are two treaties, there are two paths. And the UK government And I personally think that the older NPT is the right path, and this new treaty, which doesn't try to build trust or transparency between nations, that isn't part of what they're doing, is the wrong path.
To be honest, I think it's been 50 years since that treaty was created, and I don't see us to be as close as we should be to pursuing nuclear disarmament. I think this new treaty it's a simple yes or no. Are you against nuclear disarmament? If yes, sign this treaty. If no,
No.
stay in limbo.
I've already said the UK government wants complete nuclear disarmament, but it wants it by negotiations and by everybody taking part and being honest, open and transparent. Not by one country saying, I give up, and other countries then carrying on and having a power over you.
I just don't think that's an effective way forward.
And like Mohammed said about the law being the ICJ being the Marshall Islands sued the UK and India and Pakistan for not following Article 6. So, and the ICJ rejected the claim. They dismissed the case completely, and I'm not sure the developments of it now, but if this was a thing, then maybe it would be possible to. And they dismissed it on claims that it wasn't even a real disagreement on the international stage, and that's how they dismissed it. And so, yeah, maybe with having this treaty, it would be more legally binding.
Exactly. Yeah. I think, it would improve the conversation a lot better. I'm vaguely familiar with that case, and it was just
like 2014 and 16.
Yeah. So it just goes to show the amount of work that needs to be done from where we are. This new treaty was created 3 years later, and I think the more traction it gets, the better engagement that will be had in the international courts. I think even if it just depends. So we just have to keep rolling in motion. I think going from a legal approach would definitely be the best way forward. I think political sanctions
and also the international consensus on not having nuclear weapons. It's just bad for the civilization.
Yeah, definitely.
And Mohammed, you seem to also characterize the international system as a group of rational individuals who, when there is a conflict, they sit comfortably at the table and drink coffee and solve the problem amicably. You do appreciate that countries are not operating the same resources, so the military capability of America can take up the entire West military capability combined and still win. So preaching for complete nuclear disarmament, assuming all countries give up their nuclear weapons, given that their strengths relative to other countries are not equal. So for instance, America's military budget a year is more than the whole West military budget combined, which means that we are not still operating on equal grounds. So when there is a conflict, how do you think the world is going to be? Is it going to be safer and more amicable without a nuclear weapon, or is going to be kind of more dangerous when there is a nuclear weapon?
Yeah, I think it would be much more dangerous with the nuclear weapons. For example, if I'd say, just using a case study, for example, if it's the invasion of the country of America or something to that extent, which would provoke nuclear catastrophe. So if you had ISIS, for example, creating a stronger force, like this is a smaller conflict in the Middle East, where ISIS is combating and they're fighting, and you have issues with the Taliban, and there's conflict among the American soldiers. I think that's on a low level. But if you were to have an uprising in America or something to to that extent, I think the possibility of then having nuclear weapons from America as quote self-defense, then targeting the Middle East, I think that they become more brave when they know that they have the backing of nuclear weapons, even if they were to target a smaller area or use one of their smaller missiles. I think it definitely disrupts the opportunities for peace.
Could I just throw something into the conversation here? Yeah. Let's imagine a world in which all states have destroyed all their nuclear weapons and promised never to produce any more. And then imagine a country like North Korea who decides that they're going to produce their own. First of all, there is no authority in the world at the moment that could stop them. And once they had that nuclear weapon, they would then have power over any other country in the world. So in my way of seeing things, we're never going to get rid of all nuclear weapons until there is a world government which has the authority to stop countries misbehaving. Like on my model island, a police force. We need a police force that can go in and... So everybody got rid of their guns, but one country, one family, makes their own gun and then starts threatening everybody else. There has to be a police force. At the moment, there isn't anything. There is no global authority. And I don't think that the world... is obviously other countries must see this as a danger as well. And therefore, I think until we have a world government, we ain't never going to get rid of nuclear weapons. Even though, countries say they want to, in the long term, but until that happens, I just can't see it happening. So what we need is a world government, in my opinion.
I think with this whole discussion, if they were to throw out their nuclear weapons with one goal, it's a process of creating that nuclear weapon again. It can sometimes even take a few years, and within that process there should be negotiations to monitor the import and export of materials and resources that are being used. And I think it's not just going to be each country throwing their weapons into the sea and then just going back into their own homes. I think they still would be going out into the community and making sure that no individual countries are then having resources, because it can't just be a one-way street. It will be bilateral. It will be import and export. It will involve different countries. It's not just as simple as nuclear weapons being hidden in a secret bunker that's out of the eyes.
But as long as we have a world where countries are sovereign and can do what they want, there's nothing to stop a country from doing that.
Yeah. And leaders come and go. So assuming if you are the president now, you will agree, but you are obviously going to leave the scene, and maybe I will come and I'll think that no, I'm not interested in giving up or pursuing this agenda again. President Obama started nuclear disarmament, and within the treaty with Russia, they reduced their nuclear warheads like quite appreciable number. But after Donald Trump came, the whole processes or negotiations stalled, and now there is evidence that they are still building up again. So I kind of agree with Philip that until we have a global kind of authority that can enforce complete law, we can never achieve complete disarmament. And it is also impossible to have this sort of global authority. So in effect, we are not going to achieve this nuclear.
No, it is possible. Why is it impossible?
Because countries are secretive. So a country can decide to say, okay.
Yeah, but if you go back a couple of thousand years, cities used to be completely autonomous. Now we've got countries. Cities are no longer autonomous. Things develop over hundreds or thousands of years. Things develop, but we are talking about long-term change.
Philip, given that it is kind of difficult to imagine a world in which China the rising dragon will say, okay, I'm ceding my authority to a higher authority to come and tell me what to do. Or Russia, as huge or as big as Russia is, to say, okay, well, I want the world to be a perfect place. Remember, all this happens because of we are fighting over limited resources. And resources, because population is increasing, resources are going to decrease. And human by nature, we are selfish and greedy. So if you employ all the philosophical or mathematical models, it's even not going to be possible. Even among your own children, the siblings, one person always tries to eat more than the other. And so it kind of creates this confusion.
I'll tell you what I think is going to make countries change their opinion, which is global warming. Once the temperature, the average temperature throughout history has been 14 degrees hotter than it is now. 14, not 1.5, not 2, 14. That's where we're heading. That will bring such a crisis on the world. You know, we're going to get, as a result of that, we're going to get wars, we're going to get... Eventually, the countries will come to their senses and say, this is a global problem, we all need to work together to solve that. And that will make them realise that they've got to share their sovereignty with a higher power. But it's a way off. We have a few wars before that.
And that's even if we are able to stick around for global warming. I think the threat of nuclear warfare is always imminent. We're currently 100 seconds away from midnight, so I see that point. I think with the leaders as well coming and going, I think that's the reason why legalizing this whole idea is pivotal, because of customary international law. So that stands the course of time. You know, so it'll be there regardless of who the leaders are, because all leaders, when they come, will be familiar with this creating normal international law.
The Iran deal was just signed in just 2015, and then Trump came and said, "I'm not interested. Like, I'm pulling out," and he pulled out.
Yeah.
So and yeah, I kind of I'm very skeptical about this. But if what Philip is saying, global warming, which is increasingly becoming a threat in the public of mad concern, but of course certain people, individuals do not agree, i.e. Donald Trump, think that all this global warming is a hoax and is not even real. And some scientists even say that, well, even if it comes, humanity will survive because we are adaptable. We adapt to whatever situation. We have survived asteroid hitting the Earth, which the impact and effect is even twice all nuclear weapons in the world detonating, and humans still, like mankind, still survive. So,
the mankind wasn't here when the dinosaurs were destroyed 60 million years ago, and the last big asteroid. We hadn't evolved by then. We've evolved since then. But I know what you mean.
Yeah, of course. There's still we'll adapt. We're still going to adapt and still agree. And coronavirus is a global pandemic. It affects everyone. And when Donald Trump was speaking yesterday, he singled out UK and said UK is doing well, but I'm banning all European countries, which shows that even in the midst or in the face of adverse serious threats, countries are still going to pick and choose, and they are still not going to act rational. So this conversation can go on, but me, I am skeptical as well. But you have to hope. I am completely hopeless about nuclear disarmament. So far as greedy leaders, like all of us sitting here, once you ascend that throne, you take off the cap and you start thinking like a president or a prime minister. I don't think we are going to get there. If you will get there, countries like UK should take the lead. Yeah, the world is dangerous, but I'm giving my help so that other countries can also follow suit. If left to United States and America alone, they can just United States and Russia or China, they can just do their own thing. Whether nuclear weapons exist, UK maintains it or not, UK is declining in both conventional military warfare and in both nuclear weapons. They now operate only 4 Trident submarines, which is the fewest among all the 5 members of the permanent members of the Security Council. So the earlier they give up and channel the money in other areas, the better. They have to give their members of society some kind of welfare, good living, like Switzerland, Finland, all of them, that invest 200 billion in a useless nuclear weapon that you are not going to use it. Because there is not going to be an incident in the near future that will necessitate every country to use it. And so far as every country detonates one, then all of us are doomed, because the fear of preemptive strike. But as soon as Russia decides to invade UK, and UK decide to deter them by detonating one attack, all countries will be in hurry. Preemptive. Let me take you first before you take me. And these countries have developed second strike capabilities. So even if you attack me, I still have the capability to also attack you. So it is useless to use it. You are not going to use it. You are only pumping money. Pumping money, 200 billion pounds sterling. It's not a small money. I think it can do a lot of things. Since you are not going to use it, Russia is not going to invade you. It's not going to attack you. Yeah, it's probable, but it is very far away from reality. So let's invest the money somewhere proper. Education, healthcare, housing. Is completely insane to see people living on the streets while you invest 200 billion in maintaining nuclear weapons that have no function at all. Since 1952, that UK developed a nuclear weapon. They have never ever used it.
Yet.
And the first time they use it, we will not be here to discuss the aftermath. all of us are going to die.
Yeah.
So the better we give up and invest the money somewhere, like Switzerland, Finland, life is good, life is okay, they are moving on. They have no fear of somebody attacking them. Philip do not think that America will come to the aid of UK should Russia attack. America has an interest. America will not sit down for Russia to attack. And I don't think Russia will
has to do it because of NATO.
Yeah, because of NATO.
At the moment, yeah, but we're talking about the future.
That's speculating.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's exactly. I mean, you have to speculate, but
But now, like, current rules do exist.
Yeah, where we are right now at this
NATO,
moment.
But what
issue, like, it
the
comes-
responsibility of the government is to protect its population, not just today, but for the next 100 years, 200 years. We have to think about the future. That's the job of government.
Yeah, but I don't think.
What about people who haven't spoken? Has anybody else got? What about all these other people?
Anybody else? Any points?
I think the UK doesn't want to give up their nuclear weapons, because I think that's like one of the last factors that make them a superpower. Because throughout the 21st century, I can see, no offense to any British person here, but the Suez Canal War, everything, the UK has lost their stand as one of the major powers. So I believe that that's one of the reasons why they don't want to lose the nuclear power. Because if they lose the nuclear power, they won't be one of the big dogs again. They would practically be like any other European country. They might still have some history and all, but they won't be considered in terms with America, Russia, and other nuclear powers.
Good, thank you. Anybody else?
I also think these nuclear weapons in the international system will create a balance.
Shh.
They create a particular balance. Not just the UK, the 5
Permanent members of the
of the
Security
UN,
Council.
they all sum up to a particular amount of power that they are all emergence of the Cold War and winners. So with that, they look out for one another, and then, like he said, if these nuclear weapons are for counterattack measures, so why won't they allow other countries to do their own counterattack measures? Because the 5 of them, the 5
Nuclear
powers
states.
are they're looking after their own interests. We see ourselves as same humans, same countries that can control these nuclear weapons. If we allow other countries to build their own weapons, what is the tendency that they will not take us out as nuclear heads and then try to put their own selves ahead of us. So like, UK cannot set a moral pace for the world because it's just like every other country in the world that has the nuclear weapon is thinking rationally. What if I give it up? The reason why the Falkland region was even invaded, one of it was because the Argentinians thought UK was losing its power and all that. So because of that, they decided to invade the Falkland region. So the United Kingdom decided to fight back and then get that region back. Although the Falkland region was not very, very key to its interest, but then they still had to show that this is our territory. It's very important to us. We have to get it back. And then they used every measure in its power to get it back. So countries are watching that. They're looking at you like it's looking at every weakness they can get from you. The moment they realize that you're weak in this aspect, they decide to put in their own attack. And there's every tendency that, if not Russia, other countries might decide to take advantage of the United Kingdom giving up its nuclear weapons. So why should they be the first to do that? With the statement it's given, the UK is giving concerning the nuclear weapon, it's very rational. Okay, we're willing to give it up, but what is the rationality that every other country that has it will give it up? I cannot just be the first person to lay out my own teeth and then assume that every other country will also do the same. It's not possible. It's not rational.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Do you think that other countries might follow the example set out by the UK? They would give up on nuclear weapons.
No.
US will.
And what would the implications for like security dilemma that exists right now in the international system?
It wouldn't make much difference. It wouldn't make much difference, would it? I mean, France's nuclear weapons don't really achieve anything. But there are three big nuclear powers, and there are lots of small states which would like to have nuclear weapons. I mean, Pakistan and India have both developed their own nuclear weapons. I would like to just mention that since they have nuclear weapons, they have not fought a big war. Why not? It's pretty obvious. They're frightened of what would happen. Nuclear weapons have brought peace, in my opinion. The reason we haven't had a global war for the past 70 years, I think it's nuclear. I don't think it's the United Nations, although the UN claims that it's them. I think it's nuclear. People are just frightened. So nuclear weapons are a force for peace, in my opinion.
I think this idea of war is only applicable when it's the Western forces that are involved. It only becomes a world war when it's America and Britain that are involved. It's World War II when America and Britain are involved. But wars have been going on and millions, hundreds of millions of lives have been lost in the Middle East. I don't think nuclear wars have been that much of a key stronghold in ensuring peace. I think wars have just been going on, but it hasn't been people in the West that have been dying. It's been people over Africa and all over the Middle East that have been dying.
Yeah, countries, especially
I think
in
there's
Africa.
definitely wars been going on, but
there's been no world. A world war is when countries turn their whole economy to fight in the war. When normal economies stop, and the whole economy is aimed at one thing, which is defending itself or invading some other country. But we haven't had that. Lots of civil wars. Since the UN was formed, there's been a new civil war every 3 months, 4 months in the world. The UN has completely failed to stop civil wars. Why? Because of sovereignty. You know, they have got no power to go into a country and stop a civil war. I think until we've got a world government, we ain't going to solve any of these problems.
I don't think there will ever be a world government. I think that's just too much authority and sovereignty to
Sure
give
there
up.
will. There's no other way.
The
There's
United
no other
Nations.
way of stopping the world reaching 14 degrees centigrade. That would just be absolutely.
It definitely needs to be achieved, but the United Nations is supposed to be the world government.
No, excuse me. I beg your pardon. The world government is not. The United Nations does not claim to be and does not want to be a world government. It's a forum where nations meet to discuss, and which has agencies like the World Health Organization. All of these agencies are parts of the UN, but it is not a world government.
So you mean an enforceable government?
Sorry?
An enforceable government.
A government which has power to go into a country and stop its government from killing its own people, developing nuclear weapons. We need a global police force, and only a global government can do that.
But the sovereign states won't ever.
Yeah, we're so
They used
far
to
away
say
from
that about cities in Iraq, in the Middle East. You know, they thought that these cities were sovereign, could do anything. And they used to fight wars. I mean, that was 5,000 years ago. That's how they saw the world. We've come a long way since then. We've still got a long way to go. But there's no way that we can solve world problems without a world government.
Yeah, but that might not. We might lose it.
Yeah, that's completely
before it
impossible.
happens.
I don't think it's impossible because, according to him, if you read Thomas Hobbes, the State of Nations, it was that same fear that made humanity form a state. And I believe it's that same fear that will make states form the world government that's talking about.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that it's too utopian to envision a world in which you have this global government, because if you look at the power transition theory, where one hegemon will rise, he will fall, another one will rise. So we had United Kingdom that dominated the whole world in the 19th century, Western Hemisphere. American came and pushed US out and major European powers out of the Western Hemisphere. And US established a hegemony in the Western and now ruling the world. China is rising gradually. China is attaining military parity with the United States. Economically, is at par with the United States. Technologically, and now UK is buying into the 5G technology. We don't know the implications of that 5G technology. But those who knows, like the US, that is why they are just chasing Huawei like that, because they know the implication of countries signing on to that 5G technology. So, envisioning a world government in which major powers will just cede their autonomy to one central authority to dictate for them is highly, highly impossible. Even amongst small Western European or European Union, UK thought that it is not benefiting much, so I'm pulling out. And it was like a dream. They left. So envisioning a situation where people ceding their authority, their complete autonomy to one central authority is
No, I'm not saying that. I mean, cities have authority. Regions have authority. You have to share sovereignty. That's what the European Union is all about. It's sharing a bit of your sovereignty. And that's what a world government would be. It wouldn't have complete power. That would be dangerous. Yeah, you'd only have to get Donald Trump as the president of the world, and God help us all. So you share sovereignty. You have a little bit for the world, and a little bit for the regions, and a little bit for the countries, and a little bit for the cities, and a little bit for the individuals. I've got sovereignty, but haven't got complete freedom. Because I can't go out and steal from people, because we have to think about everybody else, and that's the way it's going to work. We'll share. It's a sharing. It's not giving all sovereignty away.
Yeah, then it would just be like the United Nations. At the end of the day, that world global power is just going to be a toothless bulldog. It can't bite. It can only bark. So we have a UN that we have certain 5 countries that the whole UN can decide to take a decision, and just one of them will say, no, you said it, I won't agree, I won't take it. So that global authority, your hypothetical global authority, at the end of the day, it is going to be a toothless bulldog. Whenever there is a
well,
crisis,
then it wouldn't be a world government then, would it? A world government would have sorted all these problems out. The UN is not a model for a world government.
Yeah, if UN is not a model for world government, then it's difficult to conceive or to conceptualize the model of that world government.
Imagine yourself 200 years ago. You could never have imagined the world today, could you?
No.
Same thing. We can't imagine what it would be like in the future. But it's got to happen. Because if it doesn't, we're going to reach 14 degrees centigrade, and most of us will be dead. There'll be no food. There'll be nowhere to grow food.
It's unfortunate that I won't be around to explain that kind of.
Unless you make a time machine with all your wisdom.
I have a question as well. Philip, you mentioned global warming earlier. So do you think that global warming could have an impact on the development of nuclear weapons?
I mean, what do you mean by development of nuclear weapons? Do you mean
think
making better weapons or what?
No, do you think they would focus more, they would stop focusing on developing nuclear weapons and they will start focusing more on global warming?
I don't think they're connected really. I think people see their defence against other countries, and if they got nuclear weapons, they'll think about that. But the amount of money we need to spend $100 trillion just to replace our fossil fuel power stations. For the power stations we've got now, in Africa and other parts of the world, people have got no electricity. There's hundreds of millions of people with no electricity at all. They're going to want more electricity. That 100 trillion is probably a vast underestimate. So that's the big problem. The nuclear weapons is paltry compared with that. Absolutely, it's insignificant.
I think with regards to what she just asked, I would have thought that you ask, would the prohibition of the nuclear weapons, will it affect climate change? Because I would have thought that, okay, the whole fact that, okay, we want everybody to let go and of their nuclear weapons and all that, will you think that in the course of signing this treaty and letting go of everybody, letting go of their nuclear weapons, don't you think that it will have effect on climate change?
I think definitely for the better, if anything.
Sorry?
For the better, it'll improve the chances of.
Right now we
slowing
actually.
down.
I think one of the challenges we're facing is climate change.
Yeah.
And then in the course of we are trying to sort or solve that problem, or think not to solve the problem, but thinking of to reduce climate, the problems we're facing with climate change, and then now we are talking of nuclear weapons. Don't you think that is actually going to be?
Yeah,
I think the testing of nuclear weapons is impacting on climate change.
Yeah, you have to dig into the earth to find the materials needed for nuclear weapons.
So they're producing as well.
What did you say?
You have to dig into the earth to find the materials to produce nuclear weapons. That has an impact on.
Of course, it's going to also have the impact.
So I
on
definitely
climate
do
change.
think that they are
And
linked.
that's actually going to be a major problem as well. So while we are letting go of one problem, you're actually getting into another.
Yes. Yeah, any deals that we do make about climate change, and I think just trying to say, okay, we're as a country we're going to pursue this or that route. I think it's all really irrelevant if we don't consider everything together. So if you don't have a commitment to for nuclear disarmament, I think there's no point in really trying to create all these deals for climate change or. And anything else, to be honest. I think it's all irrelevant in the long run, to be honest. So I just want to point out as well, like the argument that I was creating was not for this to happen immediately, it is eventually. So just keep that in mind when you are casting your votes.
Yeah, but that's what the NPT says. Eventually, they want to get rid of all nuclear weapons. That's nothing.
I think this is a stronger commitment instead of just the negotiation moving past.
It's the path. There are two different paths, and it depends which path you think is the best path.
Do we have any other questions? Or any other comments? Or any other remarks? Okay, so in the light of the motion that we have today, shall we vote?
Yeah.
Okay, so this House believes that...
Should we have bets on it first?
Sorry?
Should we have bets on who's going to win?
I've only got coins, brown coins. One P's and two P's.
I'm only joking. Carry on.
No, I was considering what to bet. So this House believes that the UK government should sign the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. Who agrees with the motion proposed? Okay, so 3. And who is for? Do you have 4 there?
There's 5 in total.
5.
6.
No, I'm against.
Oh.
And who's against?
Against?
Yeah.
No, you've already voted for the motion.
She can vote twice.
No, I was just
Nice and my vote.
You can abstain.
I can serve as being the middle.
Okay, so I think we're settled. Thank you so much for attending.
What's the result?
It's against signing of the treaty.
Well done.
so
Good decision.
It was the majority.
We're all doomed. We're all doomed.